In this video, we're looking into how to contribute to the Dapr documentation. Helping out with documentation is a great way to get started with contributing to the Dapr project. Documentation in general is never finished. There's always something to improve. And the Dapr docs are no exception. From fixing small typos to providing better architecture examples, there's always something to work on that will help Dapr users. The Dapr documentation is stored in the Dapr/docs repository on GitHub. The docs are written in markdown, a markup language that should be quick to learn if you're not familiar with it. GitHub README files are also written in markdown, for example. Most Git repositories use the main branch as their default branch for their files. But the Dapr docs repo is a bit different. There is no main branch. The default branch corresponds with the latest Dapr version. The current version of Dapr is v1.12, so the default branch is 1.12. There are also older versions of Dapr. For instance, we can have a look at the v1.11 version. And we can also see that the newer version that will be released in a couple of weeks is also there, v1.13. So you can always go back to an older version of Dapr documentation or have a look at the vNext version of Dapr. The Dapr docs website uses Hugo, a static site generator, to generate the website HTML. And it's using a Hugo theme called Docsy, which is a great template for technical documentation. If you're doing small changes to the docs repo, like fixing a typo or rewriting a sentence, you probably don't need to worry about Hugo or Docsy. But if you need to add new pages, change links, or restructure the docs in any way, then it's useful if you know a bit about Hugo and Docsy, so please check their documentation. Here we see the Dapr docs website, but it's important to know that not all of the content of the Dapr docs website lives in the Dapr docs repository. If you look at developing applications, SDKs, and then we have documentation about all the different language SDKs, this information is stored in the specific SDK repositories. So the .NET SDK, the Go SDK, Java SDK, and so on. So this information is not available in the Dapr docs website. The same is true for the Chinese translation of the Dapr docs website. That's also available in a dedicated repository. The SDK repositories and the Chinese language repository are linked to this repository via Git submodules. I won't go into any detail in this video about how these work. I'll cover that in another video later. These are the steps you need to go through if you want to contribute to the Dapr docs. I'll first read them out loud and then we're actually going to do this so you can see how this works. The first step is to ensure that there is a GitHub issue you can work on. If there is no issue, you can create one. There are different issue templates for that. Once the issue is there, you can ask one of the docs maintainers to assign the issue to you. So that makes it really explicit that you will do the work and that will prevent that someone else will do the same work as you. The next step is to create a fork of the Dapr docs repository. This is required because no one can contribute or commit code to the Dapr docs repository directly. That needs to go via pull requests. And it's the best if you create your own copy of the Dapr docs repository under your own GitHub profile. Once you have that fork, you can clone that fork locally or work in a remote development environment. The best experience now is to either use VS Code or use GitHub CodeSpaces if you want to work completely remote. Both use a pre-configured dev container, so you don't have to install anything manually. Then create a new branch with a clear name that describes what you're working on. Then open up a terminal, navigate to the Dapr docs folder and run the Hugo server command. This will start a local web server and Hugo builds the website. Once it's there, you can open up this local website and you can make the changes in the docs and immediately verify that it looks and works as expected. Then commit your change, write a clear message about the change, push the commit to your docs fork, and then create a pull request against the upstream Dapr docs repo and mention the issue number in the description. That's it. Okay, let's go through all of the steps now. First, let's make sure there's an issue where we can work on. So if we look at the issues on the Dapr docs, there's this issue I created earlier, and we will add an emoji to the Dapr concepts page to make it more friendly. It's not assigned to me, but this will be like a very quick change I can do just for this demo. So there is an issue we can work on. So the next step is to create a fork of the Dapr docs repo that lives under my own profile. So we can go to fork, So I will be the owner of this repo, and the name can either be the same, or I can make it very specific that it's about Dapr. So I can change it like this, Dapr docs. So that's available under my profile. I can keep this all at the defaults. If you already know that you want to update another version of the branch than the current default version, then uncheck this and you get all of the branches under the repo. In this case, it's fine that I only have the 112 branch. So now I'll create the fork. Okay, so now I have a copy of the Dapr docs under my own profile. And we see that this fork is up to date with upstream. If you have created a fork and maybe you wait a couple of days before you start working on it, then this branch might be behind what is available upstream. So then you can always click this sync fork button. So this will get the latest changes from the upstream Dapr docs into your Dapr docs copy. So now I want to start working on it, and I am going to use GitHub CodeSpace for it. So I'm going to go to code. There's this big green button here. You can click it, but you will get the smallest development machine that's available, and it's not very performant. So I will go here and click new with options. And then you can specify the size of the machine and where it lives. So this is quite useful. So indeed, I want to work on the latest branch, 112. There's a dev container configuration available in the repository that defines what image we will be using to work on and what kind of tools are installed. There's only one option here, so there's nothing else to select. For region, just choose the closest region to you, because that will improve low latency. And then for the machine type, I suggest get a 4-core one. I didn't mention this yet, but with CodeSpaces, you do get some free hours each month. And depending how many hours, that depends on the size of the number of cores that you use. So I'm choosing a 4-core machine now. So if I use that, I can use this remote development environment from GitHub from 30 hours for free. Okay, I will now create the CodeSpace. And the first time that you create this CodeSpace, that will take like a couple of minutes because it needs to create this virtual environment completely from scratch. So I'll speed up the video and continue later. Okay, so the dev container is now spun up, and it's not completely done because there's also a script that's running now to get all of the submodule content, and then it will do an npm install that's required to run the local web server. All right, the setup script is now done. We can see there are 2 vulnerabilities in some of the npm packages. This is a good example of when to create a new issue for the Dapr docs repo to fix this. I'll do this later. What we now have is a remote development environment with the Dapr docs files. The markdown files are in the Dapr docs folder here. So what we need to do now is to preview the website and go to this Dapr docs folder and start Hugo server. So this will now spin up the local web server and we'll build our HTML based on the files that are present in this repository. So let's do that now. And we get a notification that the application will run on this port. So let's open this in the browser. And when you do this for the first time, it will also take a few moments. All right, so here is Dapr docs that are running in this remote development environment. So this is not the Dapr docs on the docs.dapr.io, but as you can see here, this is a random generated name that runs our local Dapr docs environment. So the issue that I want to work on is about updating this concepts page and updating this first sentence by adding a emoji. It's a very tiny change, but it's enough to show you what steps need to be done to contribute to the docs. So now let's go back to our development environment here. We need to go into the Dapr docs folder and then content. So this is the place where all of the markdown files are. And these folders, they correspond with the main menu items that you see here. Concepts, getting started, develop applications, operations, reference, and contributing. So before we make any changes, let's create a new branch to work on. Create a new branch. And we can call this update concepts page. So now a new branch is created where we can work on. Now let's head into the Dapr docs folder and then open up the content folder because that contains all of the markdown files. And since we're updating the concepts page, that lives in the concepts folder here, and it will be the underscore index file here, since it's the default page under concepts. And this is the text that we want to change. I want to add an emoji here. So let's add this waving emoji. We can save this. Hugo will notice that there is a change, so it will rebuild the site. So now we can have a look at the preview, and we might need to refresh this still. Yes, and once we refresh, we will see that the emoji is there. And so now we verified our change. So now we can go and commit this change. Let's do that. So let's go over to the source control page. Now it looks a bit daunting because we see over 9K plus changes. Don't worry about that. That is due to the submodules, and VS Code has a hard time figuring out all of these submodule changes. But the only change that we made is just one index.empty file. So if we click on that, that is the only change what we did. So let's stage this. Let's write a message. And let's commit this change to our local Git repo. So let's publish this branch as well, because we need to publish it before we can actually create a pull request. So let's publish this branch. It will ask, okay, where do you want to publish it to? Do we want to publish it to the origin, which is own fork, or do you want to publish it to upstream? Well, we don't have the rights to actually publish it upstream. So let's do it to our own origin, and from that we will create a pull request. So now it will be published, and the online VS Code already suggests, okay, do you want to actually create a pull request? And that is indeed what we want to do. So create a pull request. So we see that the base that we want to merge the pull request into is Dapr v112. That is correct. And what we're merging into it is our own branch, update the concepts page. So the title, it took it over from the commit message, which is fine in this case. Sign off is always required for all of the Dapr repositories, and this dev container is configured that it always do this sign off. So that's why this part is here. So the rest of this PR description is from the template. You need to make sure to follow this checklist before submitting. So because this dev container is already configured by doing a sign off, so this is already done. This is perfect. You need to have read the contributing guide. If you haven't contributed to Dapr, definitely have a look at that. If you ever change commands that are very specific for an operating system, then you need to make sure that they are available for all the operating systems. So for Linux, macOS, and Windows. And those need to use code tabs, which is a Docsy feature. In this case, we have not done that because that was not applicable. You also need to make sure that file and folder names are globally unique, because that's what Docsy uses to create links. That's also not applicable, so I can also check that off. References to pages use shortcodes. Again, that's a Docsy specific thing which we don't use. Images use HTML style and have alt text. Also, we did not do that. And places where multiple code or command options are given have code tabs. So that's more important for instance, the language SDK things. They all need to exist in different code tabs. Then give a description of the pull request. In this case, it's a demo pull request, so this should not be merged, but normally this should be like a real pull request with a good description that actually will be merged. Finally, you need to provide the issue number that this pull request will close. So I've already copied the link. This is it. You can either keep it as a link or replace this part with a hashtag and just keep the issue number. So this is the related issue number that will be closed by this pull request. So finally, you click create, and this now creates a pull request in the upstream Dapr docs repo. So I'll create it now, and we'll head over to GitHub. So if you have a look at pull requests, then we'll see that there is a pull request, added emoji to make it more friendly. And we see where it comes from, where it will be merged into, and we will see the files that will be changed. So all we have to do now is wait for one of the approvers or maintainers to approve and merge this change, and then you're a contributor of Dapr Docs. If you have any more questions about contributing to Dapr, please join the Dapr Discord and ask away there.